so excited that you have decided to join us today to talk about how to create peace and harmony in your home. So, if you're watching this video, I am assuming that you have struggled with having your kids be compliant with the things that you've asked them to do. You may have had some talking back, some disrespect, some sassiness, and just become really frustrated with the whole system of trying to manage those behaviors. So, I have assimilated all of the strategies that I've learned over the years that have been proven to be effective in managing those problematic behaviors that you're experiencing. So, these strategies have been proven to be effective with kids of all kinds of backgrounds, and whether or not they have been diagnosed with ADHD, anxiety, depression, autism, mood disorders, or just being plain strong willed. So let's dive in, and I'm going to talk about the components that come together to make the system. Like I said, this full package assimilates a number of different elements of what we consider to be very effective strategies. So when you put all of these strategies together as a package, you're going to see much greater results. So in essence, this package is going to include elements of positive reinforcement, the creation of household rules, using effective instruction giving, a consequence system. The one I like best is job cards grounding, and implementing rewards. We will go into extensive detail about all of these different components shortly. However, I first want to warn you about something that might happen before you start to see progress. I want to point out to you that you and your family should see significant behavior change within just a couple of weeks of implementing these strategies. With that said, we often see things get worse before they get better. There's actually a fancy term for this phenomenon that takes place, and it's called the extinction burst. So as you can see in this graph, we have baseline rates of screaming. Maybe this is a child who is told to do something he or she doesn't want to do, and in response screams. And we're tracking screaming in minutes of time. So then an intervention is implemented, and then interestingly enough, we see the screaming get worse. A lot of people will abandon these strategies when they see the behaviors get worse, thinking, oh, this isn't working. In fact, things are worse than ever, and they stop using the strategies. But hang in there. We're expecting that. We're expecting the extinction burst. Continue to implement the strategies, and as the graph shows, things will get dramatically better. So expect it and hang in there and continue with the strategies. I love using this example of the extinction burst. Let's say you have a soda machine in your office complex, and every day you go, you put in your coins, press the button, and you get your soda, because that's how it's supposed to work, right? So let's say one day you go to the soda machine, you put in your coins, press the button, and you do not get your drink. You become increasingly frustrated. You start to pound on the machine, maybe. Some people may even get aggressive, hit or kick the machine, but eventually they walk away. Let's talk a little bit more about why this extinction burst even happens in the first place. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever given in to your kids because they have whined or screamed to the extent that was just so frustrating for you that you just gave in? For example, you asked your son to stop a video game and to come and sit down and work on his homework. And he said, but Mom, well, I'm almost finished with this game. I'm in an important place right now. I can't stop. And whined and whined and whined until you said, okay, all right, that's fine. I think we're all guilty of that to some extent. Well, guess what? When the whining occurs and we give in, we are inadvertently reinforcing problematic behavior. By that very act, we are setting up a situation such that our child is more likely to engage in whining in the future because, hey, it got him what he wanted, right? So he learns that if I whine, I might get what I'm hoping for. And interestingly enough, when we put in a new system where we're not giving in, the child might think, well, maybe I just didn't whine enough, or maybe I need to whine a little louder. And therefore, we see the problematic behavior get worse. Hang in there. So, when you think about how often you have given in or inadvertently reinforced problematic behaviors, you might think, oh, I do that only rarely. I typically expect that my child is going to comply. Same. However, I think that we have all given in from time to time. And I want to talk about intermittent reinforcement. So, for instance, with a slot machine, you're not going to win every time, right? You're going to win intermittently. And when you do, it's super exciting and very reinforcing. So researchers have found that intermittent reinforcement, where you, in this case, don't give in all the time, is actually harder to extinguish or change than continuous reinforcement. So let's say you gave in to your child every time he whined, and then you did something different. He would think, wow, this is different. Apparently, I'm not going to get what I want. But if it's intermittent, he might think, oh, yeah, sometimes she gives in and sometimes she doesn't, but let me stay the course. And I don't want to say that our kids are methodical like this and actually thinking it through. I think it becomes an involuntary action, something that they're unconsciously aware of, that they on some level know that they may win sometimes and sometimes they won't, but they will persist in that behavior and try to get what they're going for. I want to suggest that you actually collect data so that you can see if you're achieving your goal, if what you're doing is working. Yes, I know that you want to have more peace and harmony in your home, but what does that look like? How is that measurable? I'd like you to think about your specific goals, and there may be specific goals for each child in your home, and that's perfect. I want you to get really clear on what you would like to see happen. Think about those goals in observable and measurable terms, and think about baseline rates for each of those behaviors. For instance, one child might argue with you quite a bit. So the goal might be to reduce the frequency and duration of arguing with this one child. Think about those baseline rates. Maybe on average, this one child argues with you 3 or 4 times a week, maybe for about 5 to 10 minutes each episode. So that's a real clear, concrete understanding of what that behavior looks like. Maybe you have some difficulty with kids arguing with each other. And maybe those episodes are pretty intense to where sometimes there's aggression. And maybe they occur 3 to 4 times a week and on average last about 20 minutes. So the goal would be to reduce the intensity and frequency of those arguments and those instances of aggression. So discuss that. Think about what are the behaviors that you want to track, and then create a system to collect data for those. We're happy to help you to create a sheet or a chart to keep track of those behaviors. Another important reason to collect data is so that you can make data-based decisions. For instance, if you are starting to see that there are problematic behaviors that are continuing around a certain time of day, you may want to put some more intense proactive measures in around that day. Mornings are often particularly stressful. So it'd be helpful to analyze that data and see what might be going on. Another common area of concern might be surrounding homework if it's for a child who has ADHD or a learning disability. We might see progress in most areas, and yet still around homework time, a lot of difficult behavior. It might be that we need to put some more supports in place to make that task a little bit easier or more palatable for that one child. In essence, collecting data can help us to see what's going on, if what we're doing is working, and where we might need to put some more elements of support. So, ideally, these procedures would be implemented by all of the parents or caregivers who are in the home and outside of the home. So, for instance, if you have a situation in which there are step parents, or there's a situation where your children go to the other parent's home for part of the time, ideally, you all would be using these same strategies. It becomes really magical when all of the adults or caregivers can implement these strategies. With that said, I know it's not always possible. It's okay. You will still make progress even if you're the only one using the strategies. Hang in there. It'll just happen much more quickly if you can get everyone on board. So share the video if you can. Get all of the parents or caregivers on the same page. And ideally, you would even talk about what you're targeting and share information and data together, even if you're not in the same home. So let's say you are in the same home. You know what also happens, and what I see a lot, is that there is a dichotomy. There becomes this real difference in the way that two parents who even live in the same home believe or implement behavior management strategies. So, for example, I often see one parent as being pretty strict and another parent as being more lax or soft. And interestingly enough, there becomes this dichotomy where the more one parent is more strict, the other parent tends to offset that strictness with more lax or soft behavior management. Make sense? It's almost like there has to be this compensation. The strict parent has to become more strict because the other parent who's more lax is too lax, or at least that's how we believe. What I want to suggest is that both parents come together and utilize these approaches, because when you're sending mixed messages, it's very difficult for the child. And what can often happen is the child knows how to behave with one parent and know what to expect with the other parent. So think about again the magic of what can happen if all of the parents and caregivers are rowing in the same direction, metaphorically. A little bit about corporal punishment. I often hear some parents say, hey, well, I was just brought up where, I got a whipping if I did something wrong. Corporal punishment is absolutely controversial, as you know. I want to suggest, just for the reasons that I'm going to go into, that you refrain from corporal punishment. It's not against the law, especially if it's done when you're calm and collected and implement appropriate corporal punishment, spankings. No, it's not against the law. You're not going to be reported to child protection. But what's interesting is that we're seeing that corporal punishment isn't as effective as the strategies that I'm going to talk about. Yes, it's effective for many children, and it was probably effective for you if you grew up with corporal punishment and you think, hey, that worked for me. Yes, it's effective for many children. However, it's not really consistent with peace and harmony. It's not a lot of fun to administer corporal punishment. It's just the whole idea is kind of negative, right? So we're trying to harness more positive strategies that are actually proven to be more effective. So instead of getting into the debate about whether or not corporal punishment should be used, I'm going to let you decide for yourself. But I, as a professional, am going to say that we have much more effective strategies that are a lot less controversial and certainly more consistent with creating peace and harmony in your home. So let's get started in the first important component of the intervention package. I'm sure that all of you have heard of timeout, right? It's that procedure you use when your children are younger, they misbehave, and you put them in maybe a corner or just away from the group in timeout. It's time out from positive attention or engaging in a fun activity. And then they can come back and be reintegrated into the situation after a specified amount of time. Well, how many of you have heard of time in? So, time in is, in essence, the opposite of time out, and it involves positive reinforcement. We have seen in the research that using lots of positive reinforcement and in appropriate and effective ways be actually more effective than some of the other strategies that we're going to go into. So it's important to lay a rich foundation of positive reinforcement. So by definition, positive reinforcement is something that you say or do or provide after a desirable behavior has occurred, and it increases the likelihood of that desirable behavior occurring again in the future. So for instance, let's say you ask your daughter to put the dishes away and she does it without arguing. And you provide verbal praise. Oh, thank you. You did such a great job with the dishes. I appreciate your help. I appreciate you doing it without arguing. And if she likes that form of praise, she will be more likely to comply with your requests in the future. It's important for you to think about the type of positive reinforcement your children enjoy. You ideally will deliver the type of reinforcement that each child enjoys. So think about all of the forms of positive reinforcement. I just gave you the example of verbal praise. Most of the time, we forget to use lavish verbal praise. We may say, thank you, good job, because we're all so busy, right? But for those kids who enjoy verbal praise, the more we can express what it is about what they did that we appreciate, the more effective. And I think it sounds kind of goofy at first, right? Thank you so much for doing the dishes. You did a great job. You really cleaned the counters well. You didn't argue with me. You did it when I asked you. That was really something that I appreciate. I know I'm guilty. I don't use that kind of verbal praise as often as I should. So very specific verbal praise is more effective. Physical touches are also very effective. Pats on the back. If you observe or see your kids even just playing video games, but if they're getting along and being sweet or nice, if they enjoy pats on the back or kind of like rubbing their head, do that. That's a form of time in. It's catching them being good. If they like physical touch, that is. Gestures, thumbs up, just, kind of hands up in the sky, great job. Those can also be forms of verbal praise or forms of positive reinforcement. It doesn't always have to be a tangible reward or activity, but certainly those are very effective as well. And we will talk about how to build those in, not on a super routine basis. We want to use free or inexpensive rewards. We don't want you to go broke, but they can certainly be valuable. So research suggests that we will see greater increases in positive behaviors when we use the 4-to-1 ratio. That means that we need to dole out 4 episodes of positive reinforcement, verbal praise, gestures, pats on the back, activities or rewards, to every 1 reprimand or redirection. That's hard to do, and it takes a lot of effort and attention. I think that we're more likely to notice the problem behaviors, right? We're going about our day, we're busy, we're cooking, cleaning, working, raising kids, toting kids around. We often miss opportunities to use positive reinforcement or catch them being good because the episodes or incidents of problematic behavior are the ones that catch our attention. So it's really important to make that shift. Try and catch them being good 4 times to every 1 time that you give a reprimand or redirection. I want to also talk about shaping. Shaping is a term that we use to describe rewarding successive approximations of a behavior we want to see. For example, a toddler or baby who is starting to walk we will use a lot of encouragement with, right? We're going to use a lot of praise and encouragement for every step of the way. Maybe pulling up, maybe starting to try to walk, taking a first step, or even crawling, heading in the direction of where we know that they're going to be. We're going to dole out lots of praise along the way. We can use shaping for lots of other behaviors as well. For instance, let's say you have a child who is very defiant and disrespectful, maybe curses, maybe bangs on things when angry, and is overall largely aggressive in nature when it comes to the problematic behavior. Okay, so let's say that this child is angry and disappointed and maybe verbalizes that anger in a disrespectful way, but doesn't engage in aggression, doesn't hit, doesn't punch a wall, doesn't use any cursing. That's actually heading in the right direction, right? So this would be an opportunity to use some specific praise for a successive approximation that is heading towards the behavior that we really want to see. So to have a seat, with that child and say, you know what, I know that you were angry earlier, and what I noticed is that you did a great job with refraining from hitting or from using curse words. I know that you were angry and you verbalized that anger and there was some disrespect, but I think that you're heading in the right direction, and specifically, I'm seeing that you're working hard. So that kind of praise can go a long way. Use it, leverage it. Why do we do this? I've had some parents say, well, why should I give my child praise for things that he's expected to do? He's expected to be polite. He's expected to do the dishes, or he's expected to put the trash out. Why should I thank him? Or why should I use praise? Well, yeah, you don't have to. And I get that. Yes, those are expected behaviors. But think about it. When you do a great job, or if you do something that someone appreciates, doesn't it feel nice to just hear that? And we're seeing in the research that we are much more likely to see the type of improvements in those behaviors that we want. So while you think that it should be expected, let's leverage what we know works. And let's leverage what we know that we would also like to hear. Who doesn't like to hear that they're doing a great job? In large measure, we want to set your family up for success. So, in doing so, we know that it's important to have very clear expectations. Most of your kids probably have rules at school, and when they're younger, the classroom rules are prominently displayed, and they may have this system where they bump their car or they get to go to green light or red light depending on if they're following the rules or not, right? And a lot of those classrooms are very well managed, and the behaviors are tightly controlled, and the kids are super clear about those expectations. Most families do not have a set of household rules or expectations, and they're maybe there but not clearly articulated. I think that this is an important step. And my suggestion is to hold a family meeting, get everyone involved, and develop a list that's going to be specific to your family and your needs. But it needs to be comprehensive. Have them in writing, have them prominently displayed at least for a while. Some suggestions are to be respectful, to comply with all requests from parents, to pick up after yourself, to respect others' property, to speak with an inside voice and refrain from using profanity. I like to always add, follow all school rules, follow all state and federal laws. That encompasses a lot as well. Sit with your family members. Make sure that everyone understands what those expectations are and what a violation of one of those rules would look like. Talk about some examples. Most of the time, it's pretty easy to build consensus about those rules, and it's important to get your kids to be involved. They don't have to agree with them, but sometimes it's interesting to see what they might even come up with. Sometimes they're even more stringent than what you would come up with. It's funny how that happens. I now want to talk about effective instruction giving. The manner in which we present instructions can often dictate the likelihood of those instructions being followed. For instance, if you have a young child, it's helpful for you to get down on that child's level, make sure that you have their eye contact, say, "Look at me," before giving the instruction. Similarly, if you have a teenager who's playing a video game and you give the instruction, there's a good chance that he misses it completely or forgets about it. So choose a time in which to deliver the instruction and a time where you know that you're going to have that full attention. I would suggest if you need to give an instruction while your child is playing a video game, to give a heads up and say, "Hey, in 5 minutes, I'm going to need you to come and sit with me and so that we can talk about some things that I need you to do." Give them that heads up, set a timer. When the timer goes off, remind them, "Hey, now it's time for us to talk about some things that you need to do." That way it doesn't interrupt your child right in the middle of something that he or she is doing, giving them a warning that you're going to be sitting with them to give them instructions. When you do give the instructions, try to give one at a time if possible. For instance, giving a child a list of 3 or 4 things to do, like pick up your socks and bring them to the laundry room, then I need you to take your backpack and put your backpack in your room, take your tennis shoes and put them in the mud room, and then put the trash out. That's a lot. And chances are they're not going to remember all of them. Instead, dole out one at a time, and when each task is done, that's an opportunity to give praise or positive reinforcement, and then to follow up with the next task that needs to be done. Let them know ahead of time, "I have 3 or 4 things that I'm going to need you to do." You can also ask, would you like for me to write those tasks down and you can check them off? Or do you want to do them one at a time and then I can give you the next one? And see which method your child prefers. When possible, let your child know what you would like them to do rather than what not to do. So instead of saying, "Don't run," you can say, "Please walk." Also, try to keep your instructions clear and positive. For example, if your child tries standing on the chair during meal times, rather than saying, "Be careful," which doesn't really mean a whole lot necessarily, you can say specifically, "I need you to sit down with your bottom on the chair because standing can be dangerous and you might fall." We always use, or at least I am guilty of saying, "Be careful," like when my teens are heading out. And what I really want them to do is use good judgment, try to drive slowly and to be mindful of the speed limits. You want to be specific with what you're trying to give in terms of instructions. Keep it simple. When you're asking them to do something, use simple wording that's very direct and clear, and maybe even break larger tasks into smaller steps. So instead of saying, "I need you to clean your room," which might be overwhelming to a younger child, you can say, "I need you to start with putting all of your stuffed animals on the shelf. And then once that's done, it's an opportunity for praise. And then I want you to put all of your toys in the toy box." Then follow up with praise. "And I want you to pick up any of the dishes that happen to be in here and bring those to the kitchen." It's important for you to also be polite and respectful, to use please and to use thank you, but to do it with a calm and firm voice. Refrain from yelling because remember, we're wanting to have peace and harmony in your home. And I'm just about to get to the point of what to do when you're not getting the compliance. And just a heads up or a spoiler, it's not going to involve nagging. While we're talking about the clean your room task, I want to throw out some suggestions. So, none of us have clean rooms 24/7, right? Oh, maybe you do, but I don't. And I think it's unrealistic for us to think that our kids' rooms will be clean 24/7. So, I do suggest, though, that you create certain inspection times, 1 to 2 times per week, where you are going to give them a heads up, like 1 hour ahead of time, and say, hey, remember, it's Tuesday, so that means inspection time of your bedroom is at 6 o'clock. And if they need some more guidance, you can help by doling out those individual instructions. Or if they're older, they know what it means. But if you have 1 or 2 inspection times per week and you give them that heads up, at least you know that it's being cleaned a couple of times a week. So you're adjusting those expectations, recognizing that it's not going to be clean 24/7, and kind of letting it go. Those times that are between where maybe they're busy and they don't have the time to focus on cleaning their room, you're going to let that go. But when it comes to inspection time, there's a real clear understanding of what you need to see. One last tip about effective instruction giving. Don't state an instruction in the form of a question. Sometimes I'll hear parents say, will you pick up the toys in the bedroom? Or will you do the dishes for me? That's a question. And you know what? An appropriate answer could be no. So if there is an expectation that the child complete that instruction, don't give them a choice if one doesn't exist. Instead, firmly state, I need you to do the dishes, or I need you to please pick up these toys and put them away. So keep that in mind. Do not offer an instruction in the form of a question. Okay, so I'm now going to talk more specifically about what you can do when your child does not comply. My favorite strategy is to use something called job cards grounding. And we're going to go into great detail about it. But in essence, if there's an unacceptable behavior, your child is given a job to complete. You can have those jobs written on cards, or you can just look around your house and find something that needs to be done. We'll talk about those jobs. But the reason that I like this strategy is that it involves your child actively engaging in a task instead of passively being grounded or punished. So there are times where a child might be punished. Like, for instance, I used to say that my son couldn't play video games for a certain period of time. Well, he was able to entertain himself with other things. And it wasn't, I guess, as serious of a consequence as some of the things that we're going to talk about. It, like I said, involves them actively having to work off that consequence. And it's not a passive, just you're punished or you have to go to your room or you're grounded from going somewhere specifically or doing something. All positive activities halt until that job is done. There's no access to video games, cell phone, any electronics, any kind of fun activity until that job is done. So to prepare for implementation of job cards grounding, it's helpful if you develop job cards. You could just take index cards and on each one write out a job. This is not a job that your kids are typically doing. It's not an everyday do the dishes, or it's not about their chores, but it might involve something like cleaning the baseboards in the living room, sweeping the back porch, cleaning windows in the front of the house. Each job should take about 30 minutes to complete. Develop a stack of those and have them ready. When your child violates a household rule, he or she has to pick one of the jobs from the deck. I usually say to use one job unless it's a very severe infraction, in which case you could use more. Again, each job should take about 30 minutes to complete. So your child violates a household rule. Right away, that child is told you're going to have to pick a job because of this violation, and the child is grounded from all electronics or any positive activities that your child likes to engage in until the job is completed to your satisfaction. So when the job is completed, your child has to let you know, and then you go and you check and see if the job has been done to your expectation. If it's not done to your expectation, you let your child know, you see you missed some little edges over here that I need you to go back and clean on these baseboards. Again, completed to your satisfaction. Once the job is done, he or she has access to all privileges. It's over. You don't talk about it any longer. It's just done. It's actually just a really minor inconvenience when you think about it. It's nothing major. Your child is just 30 minutes away from having access to everything, right? I know that previously I probably didn't give consequences as routinely until I started using this system, because I knew that it was going to be disruptive and upsetting, and it was hard. When I use this system, I know that this is minor. If your child does a good job, he or she is 20 to 30 minutes away from having all freedoms back. It's just a minor inconvenience. So earlier we talked about the importance of positive reinforcement. That was just catching them being good and just doling out positive reinforcement, laying that foundation. I also suggest that you tie in rewards to the job card's grounding system. A simple way of doing this is to say, on any day in which you're not given a job as a consequence, you can earn a point. And then points can be used for larger rewards. So for instance, if a teenager wants to go see a certain concert, you can think about, the concert's 2 months away. We have 60 days between now and the concert. Maybe I can say within a 1 month period or a 2 month period, if you earn 30 points. You want to look at baseline rates of the problem behaviors. Remember, we talked about that. And you want to raise the bar slowly. You don't want to expect perfection. If you have expectations that are greater than what the child can achieve, then the child's going to become frustrated. So kind of meet them where they are and raise the bar slowly. And so back to the concert example. If this were a child who, before putting this system in place, would have gotten a consequence or a job every day, we can't expect that he or she's going to have 2 months of perfect days, right? But instead, you might want to say, if you can earn 30 points, a point a day, then I'll let you go to the concert. So play with it and think about what makes sense, keeping in mind that you're wanting to reward successive approximations towards the behaviors that you want and not have higher expectations or expect perfection. Another way to use some free or inexpensive rewards and to maybe get this ball rolling is to find some little very inexpensive rewards. Create a treasure chest. You could put them in like little brown paper bags and staple them and have them in a box. And each day where they don't have a job to do, they can pick one reward. It's up to you. You can get very creative with this and make it a lot of fun. Think about what your kids would like. Think about their ages. Think about what appropriate rewards would look like for them. I want to suggest that you and your kids come up with an agreed upon gesture that you can use that lets them know that you mean business. There may be times where you're giving instructions and maybe it's not that big of a deal if they don't comply right away. And then there are other times where you may need your child to do something right away. I want you to be able to communicate that to them without words and to just have a gesture. So, for instance, with my kids, I used the peace sign. So, if I gave an instruction and this was something that I really needed them to comply with, and if they didn't comply, I would go back and I would say, hey, look at me. I need you to go put the trash out. And they knew that when they saw that gesture, I meant business. That if it wasn't done, that there was going to be a consequence. And in fact, I made it a rule that once I use the gesture, if there are any other words that come out of their mouth other than yes, ma'am, then there's an additional job. So the stakes were heightened. Remember, if you're giving a job or two jobs, your child is not able to participate in any of the fun activities, electronics. They can't do anything fun until those jobs are done. So basically, they're grounded from everything. They may choose to just sulk and sit there or go in their room, and that's fine. Electronics are handed over, or I take the remotes to any electronics, and then once they decide to do the jobs, they do them, and then they can have access to those privileges. If arguing continues after you've shown your gesture, whatever your agreed upon gesture is, and if you've given one additional job, continue to just ignore. Walk away and ignore. Remember, you want peace and harmony in your home. You're going to ignore, but they're not going to have access to any of those privileges. I'll tell you a funny little story. Actually, I'll tell you two funny stories. One is that I loved using the gesture if my kids had friends over because it was a way for me to show, hey, I mean business without having to verbally articulate, I mean business, and to embarrass them. So I would simply use the gesture and give the instruction. I remember one of my son's friends was over and he asked my son, what's up with your mom and the peace sign? And he said, I overheard them and they were younger. And he said, trust me, it doesn't mean peace. And so it's a playful kind of way to show that you mean business while maintaining peace and harmony. One other funny story that does relate to the use of corporal punishment. I just like to kind of share this with you. My son was, I think, about 7 years old, and he was in the bad habit of pushing his younger sister if she was annoying him. If he was trying to play a video game, he'd kind of push her aside. Well, sometimes she would fall and it was dangerous, and so he knew that there was a rule that he had to let me know if she was annoying him so that I could intervene and that he didn't take it into his own hands and push her. Well, anyway, this kind of continued. He was a little impulsive, hard for him to refrain. So I said, you know what? We are going to go upstairs and you're going to get a spanking because this has continued to happen. So we're going upstairs. He's crying and I'm thinking to myself, oh gosh, I dread doing this. And he's so upset and worried. He gets up to the top of the stairs and I felt bad. And I said, hey, I tell you what, instead of a spanking, I will let you get away with doing 3 jobs. He dried up his tears, pulled down his pants and said, all right, let's just do it. At that point, I knew, oh no, I got your number. We are never going to do spanking. We're doing jobs. So it's interesting how these jobs become dreaded and a very effective form of discipline that you can use while maintaining peace and harmony in your home. So there you have it. Those are my favorite behavior management strategies and those that are most consistent with achieving peace and harmony in your home. With that said, there may come a time where you need additional help. If after 1 month of consistent implementation of these strategies, if your child continues to be overly emotional or non-compliant, I suggest that you look into consulting with a professional. Additionally, if your child continues to engage in aggressive behavior, dangerous behavior, or suicidal ideation, or if you suspect that your child is using substances, you should seek the help of a professional. Additional assessment, therapy, and possibly medication may be warranted. Remember, I mentioned keeping data and collecting data about the behaviors and the times and the intensity of those behaviors. All of that can be very helpful when you meet with a professional to dive deeper and to see which additional supports may be needed. I hope you have enjoyed this talk, and if you have any questions, concerns, or comments, just give us a holler.